All right, we're in Unit 14, the digital painting assignment. There's the question of the day 4. After that, I have past examples of assignment 7. And you can start pretty straight-laced. You can see this little GIF animation. This is a demo I did of Admiral Horatio Nelson from the Brits against Napoleon's armies. And you can see it starts out like pretty straightforward, kind of loose, builds on top of the sketch, and then it starts to play with some interesting textures and stripping things away, and plays with some watercolor, and this is the end product, right? You want to find your process. So this is more than just doing a caricature and more than just trying to make a reproduction of a photograph. You want to find either a person or an animal and show it in your own stylistic way, right? This is kind of done with 80s colors and a lot of big brush strokes. And we're doing it without a background because you can always add a background later. This student did a self-portrait, which is always fun because you can be pretty forgiving to yourself if you don't look like yourself. And then he used his favorite piece of clothing as his color palette. So that was his inspiration. This was his photo reference. This was his digital painting. So now, when we get to actually the assignment, you'll see that there's lots of ways to do this, just like we saw with all the digital presentations. Each artist has a different workflow, different tools, different programs. These are all ones in Photoshop, but some of them are based on kind of shape painting. This is an artist that very closely uses something that I use. So you can see it done as a speed painting here. This is mimicking kind of Rembrandt-style painting, oil painting with charcoal on a toned, earth-toned background. And you just block in your colors. It's something that's called speed painting or shape painting on a really basic sketch. And then you just start building layers, right? And this is really sped up. This is about a 3-hour paint activity. But you can see as you build on top, you start to use smaller and smaller brushes. You start to blend. And you get soft edges and hard edges, and they all kind of come together to give you your finished piece. And that's the way that concept artist will digitally paint. They'll always start with a toned background. This is another artist. This is that guy who did the Stranger Things, poster art and type poster design. And he has a much more kind of commercial airbrush style, which is trying to be a lot more photorealistic. This is for a Beyonce campaign. And it's very idealized, right? I have slides here which are an exhaustive explanation of digital painting. I'll get into a little bit more next class once we've all started and we want to push it in different directions. But you can look at those. And then here are the two basic approaches you mostly see. You see digital painters who start with just speed painting or shape painting and then refine it from there. That can capture a lot of energy. And then you have those that start with a pretty detailed sketch, right? Not line art, not nearly as clean as line art for digital coloring, but a pretty clear delineation of everything that then they kind of fill in and then build on top of. My favorite is kind of a mix of both. And this is based on a past student's final presentation on this artist, Max Reed. And I hadn't heard of them before. I love your presentations because I get to discover new artists. But this artist, these are quick little GIF animations of their process. They start with a loose sketch with some color blocking, and then they do only a few layers to build it into the final. Some of these projects will never even go beyond one layer, right? Because they're just always replacing their pixels as they build on top. And then the backgrounds are usually pretty simple. And I just like how direct it is. So it doesn't look photorealistic. It's not meant to. It's just a lot more having fun with the shapes. And I like the level of finish that it has. And there's kind of a cartooniness to it sometimes, which can be really effective too, which I'm going to try to employ for my demo of my cat for this section. So I'll even do a screen grab of that. I can use that as reference. So it doesn't always need to be super realistic, right? This works just as much as anything else. As long as we are digitally painting and we're observing light sources and kind of modeling form. All right, another thing you do as a digital painter is you set up palettes for yourself. Your colors do not need to be from your photo reference. You know, your colors can be completely inspired from something else, which is why I'd like you to not just post your photo, but also post your kind of art inspiration. So, what did I post? So here's my cat Bigby. That's going to be my photo reference. But here are some of my art inspirations, because I'd really like the idea of turning them into kind of a children's book, kind of painted in pastel and crayon type of painting, right? So I'd say this is kind of my biggest inspiration. And then I kind of like how simple that is. Now, how can I use maybe AI to give me some other inspirations? Well, I'm going to do it this way. Instead of it being Marilyn Monroe, I'm going to put my wishes here, even though it's not going to be anywhere near what I want. So I'm going to do a modernist children's book illustration. Yeah, I'll just do illustration because I'm going to do full body, so it's not going to be a portrait. Of a tuxedo cat with sketchy lines and crayon colors. Now, if I do that without any guiding image, right, let's see what it does. And I can also pick one of these stylistic things, but all of these add a lot of information to your prompt that sometimes derails what your vision might be. Yeah. So that does meet my requirement, right? It's a little weird that his tail is red. It's like a brush. And that there's all these art supplies underneath. And it's not dimensional enough to be what I want. But what if I give it a guidance image? So I'm just going to see what it does one more time. Yeah, and that's the more kind of ambient aesthetic garbage that I'll get every time from now on. Sometimes the first time it's still trying to figure out its approach. But now I'm going to put in this, which is not a tuxedo cat, right? But it has certain colors. And then I'm going to create it. And I have it set so it's in the middle of how much it influences the result. If you do it strong, it will just recreate your result and not take your prompt into account, right? So that's kind of interesting, right? That shows like a cat's head at least. And this is why I liked this inspiration, because his body is kind of like that and the coloring is kind of like that. Now, there's some obvious glitches in it that make it clear it's AI. But this can be a helpful way to generate inspiration as well. Something that kind of bridges the gap between my photo and the inspiration I want. Now let's try taking it all the way down to a weak influence. And I can capture these. Just bring them from my downloads to my desktop. And their resolution is not good enough for printing, but it's a pretty good resolution for reference images. So let's see, I'm going to make it, because that's just really generic. So that's where you can start to use some of these stylistic ones. So let's try the cartoon version 3. And then sometimes I'll go to the really old ones that are about 4 years old. Yeah, that's almost exactly what a 1950s cartoon modernist children's book illustration of a tuxedo cat would look like, right? Okay, now that it's got that in its memory, let's go back to normal and see what it does. Now on that filter. So this is what's meant by prompt engineering. And it gives me very much the same, right? So it takes a long time and it can be frustrating, but you can get some useful results that way. You can also always change your prompt to like force more color in or force more texture. Oh, I should put, one of my favorite ways to do it is to throw in Jean-Michel Basquiat. So again, without any reference image, but now this is using art history and using an artist's name. You know, you can get some interesting effects. Now, let's put some guidance in there. And I'm going to take the one I liked that they gave me, crop it, and use that as a weak influence. And then sometimes it gets hung up. You have to reload it. But this is the kind of thing you can play with. So if it gets hung up, you just open it in a new instance. Dream Wombo. Create. Put that in. It's cartoon. Oh no, I'm going to use, let's see, Expressionism with Basquiat. And so knowing art history is a really fun way to play with this too, because it really limits the scope of things. Now create. I'll close this one. But you can see this eats up a lot of time. But this could be kind of an interesting way. It's more the background that's interesting than anything else. But it's forcing color in, right? Throw a children's book illustration in there. So what you hope is that you get something that kind of inspires you. And it gives me pretty much exactly what I put in. But it's also going to frustrate you very frequently. So what I want is at least one inspiration stylistically and then at least one photo reference. But it doesn't mean you need to be a slave to that photo reference. So what I'm going to put in from the ones I was experimenting with are two of them. This was one of them. Which was kind of the cat dragon. It's kind of what I was envisioning. And then the other was this very believable, because that's what these large language model image generators do. They're predicting what it is you mean, but that doesn't mean it's what you were thinking about. It's just something that could work for what you were thinking about. Now, this is not digital painting. This is not digital painting, right? None of these are really digital painting except for this. They're more like line art and digital coloring. But my goal is to turn it into a digital painting. So let me do that. So how do we get started? You need to have your inspiration, and then we're going to go to Photo P. We're going to do it all in Photo P with a tablet. If you like to do this in Procreate, you can, right? As long as it's at least 8 by 10 inches by 300 pixels per inch. So I'm going to start a new project, and I'm going to make this, Karl Assignment 7. Always name a file after your name. This is going to be my Big B. That's the name of my cat.